Hey, you've checked out the Good Advice podcast, and this is round two. Today's episode, we're bringing back one of your favorite guests. It's LeRon Barton. He's an incredibly gifted speaker and author. He talks a lot about race. I wanted to bring him back and get his perspective on what's happening in our country today. This was a great interview. I really enjoyed getting LeRon's perspective. Definitely grew me as a person, and I hope it does the same for you. Hey, here comes our round two episode with LeRon Barton. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice podcast. This is round two, where I bring back some of not just my favorite guests, but your favorite guests. I'm bringing back LeRon Barton, who was a guy who came on back in April, who I did not give enough justice to because it was around the time that I had a baby, so I didn't have a chance to really talk about his episode. But LeRon, I'm glad to have you back today. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing really well, man. Thank you for having me back, man. Remember, you and I, we had such a really good conversation because it was just so natural, and it was just, we were just, just kind of like shooting the breeze as if we'd have been knowing each other for like a while. So, I'm super juiced to be back.
Well, it's exciting, man. I love doing the round two series because it always feels like the first episode I have with someone, you get like right to the point where it's like, man, things are really cooking, and then you're out of time, and so it's fun to have you back. For the listeners who maybe if you haven't caught LeRon's first episode, LeRon's a writer. He writes about race. He actually is a pretty incredible entrepreneur in his own right.
Thank you.
LeRon, I don't want to steal your thunder. If you want to say anything about yourself before we dive in.
Yeah, man. I'm a writer, author, speaker. I write a lot about race, mass incarceration, politics, business, dating, tech. I've written 2 books. I'm a speaker, TEDx speaker. I've participated in workshops about race and unconscious bias in corporate America. And I'm always open to have an honest conversation about these things.
Yeah, well, as soon as George Floyd was murdered and really this dialogue started getting really powerful, you and I had sort of touched on it. We just scratched the surface, but I was like, man, I really need to sit down with LeRon again. And so I know you don't have a lot of time. And so I want to, if we can just go ahead and dive right into the dialogue. And man, I don't really have any questions prepared. I want to give you an opportunity to, because man, I've said this before on previous episodes. I have people who listen to this podcast who are from all sorts of backgrounds. They're from all sorts of different political backgrounds, different upbringings. And one of the things that I've tried to do is to tell people, man, if something rubs you the wrong way, or if you're uncomfortable with something, the right answer is probably to lean into that and really try to, just to try to figure out, okay, what's going on there. So here's a great example of this. So I've grown up in a Bible Belt-esque type environment here in the South.
Sure.
And so whenever we talk about Black Lives Matter or we talk about racial injustices, there is a lot of, obviously you have people who are blatantly racist.
Sure.
Then you have people who they aren't necessarily willing to tread into that conversation without being suspicious of the motive. That's just a political thing. Oh, that's just and really what I've seen happen over the last several weeks is people who typically maybe haven't been open to these dialogues are now wanting to lean in. They're wanting to have more conversations. Tell me, what has it been like on your end, man? I mean, I'm assuming you've had a ton of conversations in the last several weeks.
Yeah. So, it's been interesting, man. I mean, there's just been this renewed sense of just people wanting to opine, people wanting to know, wanting to know what I think. It's a lot of people, they have been reaching out, rather this to do, talks, is to do workshops, or just simply hey, what do you think about this? Or, LeRon, when you initially talk, I've gotten this twice. When you initially talked about this, LeRon, I didn't agree with you. Now I see what you were talking about. And so for that, that's been really cool. I mean, I think it can become it can become overwhelming. I mean, just that's one part of it, Blake. But the other part of it is just kind of experiencing it. I mean, so I'm a Black man in America, and so this is what I go through every day. And so to sort of be experiencing racism on a regular basis and to see it played out in such a gruesome way, I mean, it could be psychically harmful. It can be like, emotionally harmful. And so it's just it's been a very emotional time.
Yeah. Well, man, and I don't know how to ask this question without. Here's the deal. As a white guy, it feels like over the last few years, I've caught glimpses of this racial injustice that I guess I just haven't really been able to get my hands on, in the sense of like, oh, I see it clear as day. So here's some examples of this. Like back when Philando Castile was killed,
Sure.
I remember seeing that back when it happened, being like, what in the world? That is nuts. But my thinking never went really beyond that to like, there's deep institutional problems in our country. And then I spent some time in Chicago and was talking to a guy who was on his coffee table. He had just all these different photographs, and he had one from like the 1980s of a black man being lynched. And he was like, did you know that in the 80s that still happened? And I was like, no, I would have assumed it would have been,
right.
100 years ago or 200 years ago. And then I was talking to a buddy of mine at my church, and he was black, and he was saying, it's really frustrating because anytime I get pulled over, there's all these things I have to think through.
Absolutely.
And so like all of these, and so me as a white guy, I'm not the victim in this. I'm just saying I'm almost like ashamed of like the jigsaw puzzle pieces that I keep experiencing. And I don't know why it hasn't clicked more until really these last few years where the pieces have kind of come together. Why does it feel like we can't have this kind of dialogue or like get into this?
So there's two reasons. So for me, I normally don't talk about race with white people. There's some really good reasons why. For one, we're kind of past having conversations. If you want me to be honest with you, man, I mean, like there needs to be action. Like the thing about the George Floyd murder, this is nothing new. This is something that has been going on for a very long time. It's just that for some reason, it's just I don't know if it's due to COVID, if it's due to economic unrest, but like white folks are finally paying attention. And so you have black folks such as myself that are just very frustrated with you guys. We're like, why y'all finally like getting it? That's one thing, right? Two is like, you guys have to the information is out there. Like you can't rely on black folks to constantly tell you, like, look, it's I should not have to tell you that the sky is blue, right? It's been documented, right? So what you need to do is you need to research, you need to start reading stuff, because look, check it out. I consider myself to be a pretty good writer, right? But people like James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells, they have talked about this stuff for years. So they talked about it better than I could ever talk about it. So and finally, man, it's like when we do have that conversation, right? Black people will sort of self-censor themselves because they don't want to come off as not as the conversational Negro. And two, white people, they bristle at the fact that, okay, racism is systemic, and not only is it systemic, but they pay attention. I mean, like they sort of take part in it. And so, us as black folks, like, we're like, well, we can't make we can't make headway because every time, we talk about this, it's like, oh man, like yo, like I'm not racist, or like the white tears happen, and it's just frustrating because there's just so much pushback.
Mm. So how because here's what my wife and I were just talking about, because
Sure.
we've both been really man, I want to say we've been legitimately like all in on this.
Right.
But it sounds like, white people for a long time have said that. But just the other day, so she picked up the book, White Fragility, and got some people together who could do kind of like a read through of it and like make sure kind of we're on the same page together. And and basically, what ended up happening was there were people who were all in on reading it with her, and after maybe about a month, those people kind of flaked out a little bit. And so I guess kind of what I'm getting at is it kind of feels like, here's my question. You're talking about it's time for action. Like how do I, as a white person, start now being active in that activity conversation rather than it being flavor of the month? Oh, this is the thing I'm going to really get behind, and then forget about, like, how do I actually play my role well to help in some way?
That's a really good question. So first off, I was with my friend Alicia a couple weeks ago, and we're just talking we're downtown San Francisco, and we're just two black folks talking about what's going on, and so she said, if white people would just do the inner work versus, going to the rallies versus going to the marches versus wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, then we wouldn't even be here. And so what she meant, not that I'm talking for her, but what she meant by the inner work, Blake, is like, white people need to realize that, again, this is systemic. Like, racism is more than just you calling me the N-word or the police stopping me, for no reason. The inner work is realizing that this is a systemic issue, realizing that that you not only benefit from racism, but even if you don't practice it yourself, if you stand back and if you let it just perpetuate, then you are a part of the problem. So first you need to do the inner work. Secondly, white people need to start calling out racism when they see it. And so this is why I have the hashtag do something. And basically what that is that, for example, if you're at a family dinner and if you hear a relative, a family member, whoever say or do something racist, you need to call that person out. You need to let them know not only that it's racist, but you need to explain to them why it's racist. Because if you don't call it out, this is what happens, right? Two things. It says that you're okay with that behavior, and then it tells that person that their behavior is okay. So, it's like the saying, it's like the new saying that's popular. Silence is complicity, right? And so because of that, if you don't move, you're still moving. So those are like two basic steps that you need to do. And I mean, don't get me wrong, marching, going to protest, that's cool. But if you're not fighting it in your own home, then all that, that's not really for nothing though,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure it doesn't help that, on a national landscape, having this kind of conversation and leaning in, it's not being encouraged by the highest echelons of our government.
Right.
I mean, I think that's probably what even makes it even more toxic is we can't even have the dialogue without people being so vocally just strong-willed about shutting it down and closing it out. And I'm sure that's frustrating for you as well. I mean, it's interesting how it's interesting how people will not. Actually, I was just talking to a guy who, another guy who goes to my church who's black, and we were just having this dialogue, and he said, literally, the most frustrating thing is I have people who I can't even have a conversation with because they're so far gone politically that we can't even broach the conversation without guard being up, without them thinking there's some political angle. And he said, when realistically, I just care that my son is going to live a good life. Like, that's all I'm trying to talk about, is that, my son's going to be safe. My boys are going to be safe. People are going to be safe. I mean, so I don't know where you go from there other than, I guess, like you said, we call it out and we try to root it out.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, it's like, that's what we need to do, man. Is like, we need to, people need to stop being afraid, man. I mean, look, when you start calling stuff out, right, you're going to lose friends. People are going to say to you, oh man, it was just a joke, or, why are you taking stuff so seriously? But it's like, there's so much toxic behavior around racism. There's just so much cowardice. And it's like, well, you need to step up. Like, so here's the thing, right? Like, I have quite a few friends that are LGBTQ, right? Two of my closest guy friends in San Francisco are LGBTQ, right? And, I love those two men very, very, very dearly. If I love them like this, like the way that I say I do, then you can't be around me and say gay slurs. You can't be around me and make gay jokes, because I'm going to call it out. And if I don't call it out, then I'm lame and I'm a hypocrite, man. I mean, So it's just like, you have to walk it like you talk it, man.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about, silence is being complicit. I think that's a really accurate way to put it. Something else you mentioned just in the intro, that you write a lot about mass incarcerations. And it's fun. I literally just read an article yesterday morning that was talking about how some news site was reporting that black men are being the charges they're being given compared to their white counterparts in terms of being people participating in protests and what have you, like people who are being arrested and charged with things, that it's significantly harsher. The data is suggesting it's significantly harsher for black men right now. I know you have a personal passion around talking about incarcerations. And again, I don't know where I'm going with this question, other than it just brings me back to this whole institutionalized system that a lot of us are blind to, but kind of like you pointed out, reaping the benefits of if we aren't willing to say something about.
So, so I'm really happy that you brought it up, and I'm glad that you framed it from the perspective of black men, because the mass incarceration problem in this country is a black male problem. And I'll tell you why. So there are roughly maybe 800,000 black men incarcerated in the United States, maybe more, maybe a little bit less, but let's just use that round number of 800,000, right? So for every 100,000 for every 100,000 people locked up, 8,000 of them are men. I said people, I said women and men of all races. There are more black men locked up in America than there are women in England, China, just various parts of Asia. Like, we've locked up so many black men that it's generations of just us are just gone. And so this is why you have things such as, okay, well, we're the least employed. We are the least enrolled in school. We have the least job mobility. All these things feed into each other. This is why I say racism, white supremacy is a system. So, systems, it's hard for people to get around that, because see, here's the thing, right? Like, racism exists, but nobody's a racist. And that's not possible. It's like, you can't have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and not have the peanut butter. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, it's just ridiculous.
I mean, is it, because I'm thinking about that statement. And so now I'm thinking, and obviously it leads into the whole conversation of like unconscious bias. And, I'm even thinking of myself. I'm thinking like, what are my tendencies? What are my biases that I'm totally blind to? because I guess it's like you're saying, when we think of a racist, we think of like the totally, the worst form of that word, and we don't always realize, no, here's how I'm actually contributing to the racism conversation by my own actions, my own mistakes, my own unwillingness to speak up, or my unwillingness to change. It's a I don't know, man. It feels like the light bulb is clicking on faster for some people than the other.
Sure. Yeah, no, so, like my friend Dr. Vibe, he always said, you have to meet people where they are, right? And so, some people are going to get it quicker than others, man. I mean, it's a learning process. I think that, so what I'm going to say may be a little controversial, but you have some Black people that just will not have this conversation. And, you got to respect that because again, like a lot of us feel like we've been, saying this over and over and over and over and over for white folks. And, just the fact that you guys are just now coming to the party, man. I mean, it's like, we're kind of over it. I always use this quote, like, Toni Morrison once said, I can't be the doctor and the patient. So I can't live this and tell you how to treat me. Like, it's just, I'm so busy trying to survive in this system that I don't have time to show you how to be a better white person. Like that, it sounds ridiculous. So,
no, yeah.
What I always recommend to, well-meaning white people is to participate in anti-racist white organizations. I think Surge is a really cool organization standing up for racial justice. It's just a bunch of really cool white folks who really want to fight racism. And, I don't think that they have any Black members. And that's because, even like, you mentioned the book, White Fragility, right? So that book is popular because it's a white woman talking to white people. And there's a certain way really that white folks want to be talked to when it comes to race. And so Dr. D'Angelo does that very well. That book is not for me or for any other marginalized, racialized group, but that book is specifically for white people. So.
Yeah. And, I'm trying to talk about it carefully too, because I think it would be a huge mistake for a white person to now basically be saying, oh, wow, this is so hard, like figuring this out. Oh, this is so hard. Because obviously it's not about.
Just imagine living it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about, not that I'm speaking from.
You're right, word.
I keep thinking to myself, it's not about me. It's not about like, it's not about like the pain of like, oh man, that's a bias I have. It's not about me and about, oh, that's so hard for me. It's okay. Now I need to move past sort of the light bulb moment and actually find those actionable steps. Because like you pointed out, I mean, yeah, try living it. Right. And so I think my concern is that we as white people would just, dude, I don't know if this is like cliche to say steal the thunder, but I mean, people who I've talked to who are like, oh, this has been so hard to like navigate. I'm like, man, it's really not about you. It's really, as a white person, it's not really about you as a white person. It's like, what do we do now? Like what do the conversations look like? How are we having conversations? And I don't know, man. It's interesting for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, it's interesting to just see just like a whole swath of whites just being very very interested in this.
Yeah. Are you not suspicious? Sounds is like the wrong word, but like, are you and even cynical sounds like the wrong word. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. Are you maybe curious is the better word. As you seeing people like really kind of rally around this, are you curious as to like where this goes or if it's legitimate or sincere or?
So, like a friend of mine, well, like I should call it like a colleague of mine, we were talking about this and I said, this is a litmus test. And she said, LeRon, with all due respect, I don't agree with that. The litmus test is 6 months from now. You dig? So it's like 6 months from now, will white people still be as passionate, as engaged as they are? And so, that's what we'll be looking at. I mean, it's like, you can see the energy kind of dissipating right now, right? I mean, which is, it's natural. Like, people get fatigued, but it's like, are the folks who are enraged, are they still going to be dedicated? And so, that's the thing. So for me, like, it's hard for me to, I'm trying to figure out how to hold the well-meaning white person, because the fact that historically white people just have not been there. So I'm like, well, like, I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were talking about this thing, and I'm sorry, actually two friends. One of them said, "Don't ask for who the bell tolls. Just go for it." And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And another friend of mine said, we were talking about this sincerity, and she said, well, LeRon, do they have to be sincere? And I said, wow, my friend Alicia, she always says these great things. And so I thought to myself, I said, wow, I guess they don't need to be sincere to really make a dent, to have them do what we need to do. I mean, it's like people, for so many reasons, people will opt to do things that may not be the reasons why, but just that they're doing it should be good enough. And I can see where she's coming from. I'm just a really inquisitive dude, where it's like, I'm always asking why, but why ask, but like, why ask why, right? I mean, at the end of the day, as long as it gets done, right?
Yeah. But I know a lot of people listen to this podcast they're entrepreneurs, they're business owners.
Sure.
I mean, I'd be curious what your perspective, your insight is on their responsibility as a business owner. And more, I don't know what that actionable looks like, other than my wife and I, we were talking about, there are so many businesses out there who are promoting BLM, and there's nothing wrong with them promoting it, but
sure.
But then there's this other conversation. Joy and I, we had a business send out an email that said, hey, here's how we've been supporting Black lives for the last decade. And that really meant a lot. We were like, wow, like this, we want that to be true about us. Like, not just like flavor of the month, we're in it. So like, what do we as business owners, entrepreneurs, innovators, startup founders, what does it look like to be, obviously invested in our businesses, but also active and progressive in the conversation that's happening right now?
I think that one of the ways to do that is to be amplify and listen and to support Black voices. I think it's really important that we so a lot of times, like, white people will like censor themselves in this conversation. And so, what I would advise you all to do is to just sit back, listen, take in everything. Don't be so quick to just, try to bogart the conversation. Obviously jobs, jobs are important. Donations are important. I mean, the thing about the lovely thing about the movement, Blake, is there's so many ways to be involved. People, obviously, the movement needs money. Like, the movement needs platforms. People should protest. People should organize. I mean, it's so I'm gonna keep it real with you. It's got to be more than a book club.
Yeah,
it's nothing wrong with reading, but it's like, at the end of the day, it's got to be action. And so if you are an entrepreneur, people should lead by example. So if you have a company, you should like make strides to make sure that people are included, not just for window dressing. A friend of mine said a lot of diversity, DI stuff is past season's window dressing. My friend Neha said that, and that's true. Like, just don't collect Black folks just to look good. Actually empower people, because when people are empowered, like, people become invested. And when people become invested, they believe. And when people believe, they will do what they can to make sure that your business is the best that it can be.
I love it, man. Great words to end with, man. I love it.
Well, fantastic.
We're running out of time. What's next for you? Man, I always like to give people an opportunity to talk about what they're working on, what people can jump into.
So, like, I'm actually I'm working on 2 TEDx speeches. So, I'm memorizing one. I got to write another one. And I'm doing a lot of speaking engagements. I'm definitely talking to some folks about coming out. Not coming out, but virtually speaking and doing workshops. And I'm just still writing. I like a essay that I wrote for this magazine called 7x7. It's a San Francisco magazine. I always want to try to do something local. It's out. It's about the talk. The talk is a conversation that Black parents have with their children about race and what they need to do when they are stopped by the police. So yes, and continue to write, continue to talk on dope platforms like this, man, and just keep moving.
Yeah. Well, LeRon, I know we had to kind of get this meeting together. We scheduled a couple of times, so I just appreciate you making time today.
Yeah, man. Definitely. Look, Blake, man. I always like talking with you, man. This is, it's always good times, and it's good stuff, man.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, man. And for the listeners, we'll put some a link to maybe LeRon's LinkedIn profile. Is that the best place for people to follow up with you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Great. Okay. Well, LeRon, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Blake, man. Blake, you take care. Be well and be safe.
Thank you, sir. For listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. That's round 2. We'll catch you later. See ya.